What if everything you've been told about being too much was actually evidence of something extraordinary? You've heard it before: you're too intense, too sensitive, too serious. But what if those criticisms weren't flaws, but signals pointing to a deeper truth about who you are? Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But here's the twist: these very qualities may not be signs of dysfunction, but signs of differentiation, a rare psychological profile Jung spent his life studying. But what if who you truly are doesn't fit the mold? You may feel like an outsider in your own life, too deep for shallow conversations, too curious to follow blindly, too emotionally raw in a world that rewards numbness. Modern thinkers echo this. Brown says, "Owning our story can be hard, but not nearly as difficult as spending our lives running from it." Viktor Frankl wrote that life is never made unbearable by circumstances, but only by lack of meaning. So if you've ever felt like your depth is a burden, this video is for you. By the end of this journey, you'll understand why Jung and some of today, its most powerful voices in psychology, believe that what society calls too much may be exactly what the world needs most. And there's one catch: Jung discovered one psychological trap people like you often fall into. We'll reveal it later in this video. Let's begin with the first unmistakable sign that you're not broken. You're just operating on a different psychological level. You feel emotions more deeply than anyone around you, and it's exhausting. But here's the truth: this isn't a flaw. It's a form of intelligence, one that most people don't understand. And frankly, fear. Carl Jung called it the activation of affect-toned complexes, deep emotional currents in the psyche that aren't just responses. They're living energies. They shape how you see the world, how you experience others, how you respond to silence, tone, energy. Modern psychology is finally catching up. Dr. Nicola Paro calls emotions data from the nervous system. They're not random storms. They're messages alerting you to what matters. And in your case, the volume's just turned all the way up. Let me paint a picture. You're in a room. Everyone's laughing, chatting, being polite, but something feels off. You notice the forced smile. You sense the tension behind the words, and suddenly, you're carrying something invisible. The unspoken weight no one else seems to notice, or wants to. That's your gift. You're the emotional barometer. You feel the weather shift before the clouds even form. Susan Cain, author of Quiet, said, "Highly sensitive people tend to notice more, and that includes both beauty and pain. But there's a shadow to this gift. Because you feel so much, you often begin to believe you're too much. You were probably told as a child, 'Don't be so dramatic. Stop crying. Toughen up.' So you tried. You dulled your edge. You learned to perform fine. You numbed. And that's when the real damage began." Jung warned that when emotion is repressed to please the collective, it doesn't vanish. It splits, creating an internal war. He called it psychological splitting. When one part of you feels, while the other part hides. And that war, it shows up as chronic fatigue, anxiety, emotional confusion. You feel like something's wrong, but you can name it because part of you is still pretending you're okay. Let me ask you this. Have you ever walked out of a normal conversation, completely drained, as if you were just in a therapy session you didn't sign up for? That's because you weren't just listening. You were absorbing. People like you don't just sense emotion. You carry it, like water, into your lungs. And if you don't learn to release it, you drown in it. But Jung didn't leave us there. He gave a path forward. He taught something called active imagination, a technique where you consciously engage your emotional experiences as if they were symbolic characters in a dream. Let me break that down. Next time you're overwhelmed by emotion, instead of suppressing it or spiraling, try this. Close your eyes. Ask yourself, what shape does this feeling take? Is it a storm, a child, a voice behind a door? Give it a face, give it a name, then talk to it. This isn't fantasy, it's psychology. You're dialoguing with a living part of your inner world, and often that conversation reveals the one thing you didn't realize. You were never broken. You are feeling what others refuse to. Jung believed this kind of emotional sophistication is rare, and that if nurtured it becomes a kind of inner GPS for truth, but only if you stop apologizing for it. Because here's the light side of this gift. When you honor your emotional depth, without shame, you become magnetic. Your presence brings people home to feelings they've long forgotten. You become not just a feeler, but a healer. So stop shrinking, stop editing your feelings to make others comfortable. The world doesn't need more emotional neutrality. It needs more radical presence. You were born with it. Now it's time to stop hiding it. You question everything, even when the answers make you lonely. You don't just want to know what happened. You want to know why it happened. Why do people stay in relationships that make them miserable? Why do we chase things we don't even want? Why does everyone pretend surface-level conversations are enough? This isn't a personality quirk. This is the awakening of what Carl Jung called the Transcendent Function, the mind's drive to evolve past the unconscious programming of the collective. Most people live inside what Jung described as the persona, a mask carefully constructed to survive social approval, but you keep reaching behind the mask. Your curiosity is forensic. It dissects contradictions. It pokes holes in groupthink. It shreds shallow logic and demands a deeper truth. Jordan Peterson said, "The purpose of life is finding the largest burden that you can bear and bearing it. And sometimes that burden is the truth. You can't unsee the patterns. You notice the lie hiding inside the polite smile. You feel the falseness in a system everyone else accepts. And the moment you start asking, the people around you flinch, because your questions don't just seek answers, they threaten illusions. And illusions are the foundation of most people's lives. You've probably heard this before. Just go with the flow. Stop being so negative." But this isn't it's deep thinking. The kind Daniel Kahneman described in Thinking. Fast and slow is system to thinking. The slow, deliberate kind that questions assumptions and challenges comfort. And yes, it can feel like a curse, because the more awake you become, the more alone you feel. Jung wrote that individuation, the journey to the true self, often requires walking through long stretches of psychological solitude. And here's the danger. If you start believing that your questions are a problem, you'll shrink them down to fit the crowd. You'll become agreeable, but dead inside. And that's not humility. That's betrayal. Mark Manson said, "Everything worthwhile in life is won through surmounting the associated negative experience." And for you, the negative experience is isolation. But don't confuse that with rejection. Sometimes, isolation is clarity. Here's a question no one asks you enough. Have you ever felt like your mind is wired to notice too much? To deconstruct everything? To see all the angles until you spiral? That is because your brain is running a higher level process, Jung associated with what he called prophetic consciousness, not in the mystical sense but in your ability to anticipate outcomes, feel cultural patterns, and sense the collapse before it happens. You see where things are headed, often long before others do. But here's the tension. When you try to warn people, they get defensive. When you offer clarity, they say you're cynical. When you call out illusions, they call you difficult. And over time, you start wondering, is it worth it? Jung would say, yes, because without individuals like you, the collective can't grow. You are the friction that sharpens thought. You are the challenge that makes truth possible. But you can't carry this gift without structure. So here's a tool Jung used. He taught that the mind thrives when it externalizes the unconscious. Keep a wide journal. Whenever you encounter something that doesn't sit right, a conversation, a rule, write down what disturbed you and why. Then ask yourself, is this mine? Or did I inherit this belief from someone else? That's how you transform questioning into insight and prevent it from becoming mental overload. You're not too skeptical, you're not too intense. You're awake in a world that's learned to sleepwalk through life. Keep questioning, keep peeling back the layers, because that discomfort you feel, that's the edge of truth. You didn't choose independence, it was forged in fire. People call you strong, they admire your confidence, they assume you like being alone. But they don't see the truth. Your independence wasn't born from peace, it was born from necessity. Carl Jung believed that some people are forced to begin the journey of individuation early, the painful process of becoming a fully integrated self. Not because they want to, but because staying dependent became too painful to bear. You learned to self. You became your own protector, your own comfort, your own voice in the dark. David Goggins, a man shaped by trauma, said it best. You're in danger of living a life so comfortable and soft that you will die without ever realizing your true potential. You didn't want soft, you wanted truth. So you stood up, even when no one clapped. You walked away, even when it left you aching. You rebuilt, even when the pieces didn't fit right at first. And that's what people don't understand. You don't walk alone because you prefer it. You walk alone because the path you're on is yours alone. But here's the paradox Jung uncovered. That strength can become a shield, a wall that not only keeps danger out but keeps love out too. Because when your independence is born in pain, you start to believe that needing anyone is weakness, that leaning is dangerous, that closeness is a threat. Dr. Emile Levine, in Attached, writes people with avoidant tendencies value independence so much that they may keep partners at a distance, even when they long for connection. Sound familiar? You crave connection. But the moment someone gets close, you feel yourself pulling away. Not because you don't care, but because your nervous system remembers what it's like to be dropped. And that's the silent grief you carry. The loneliness of being your own savior for too long. Jung called this a form of ego inflation, where the psyche over-identifies with self-sufficiency to avoid vulnerability. But here's the light side. When you heal, you don't lose your independence. You evolve it. You move from hyper-independence to healthy interdependence. From I can trust anyone to I will choose who has earned my trust. From self-isolation to sovereign connection. Because here's the truth. You don't want to be saved. You want to be met. Not in your pain, but in your power. Brown reminds us, vulnerability is not weakness. It's the most accurate measure of courage. Let me ask you something, and be honest. Do you secretly feel exhausted carrying it all alone? Do you ever long for someone to simply hold space for you, without needing to be fixed, without needing to explain? You're not weak for wanting that. You're human. And Jung believes that once the ego becomes strong enough, It no longer needs to isolate. It becomes willing to merge, not to disappear, but to connect in truth. Here's a tool Jung used for people like you. He called it shadow integration. Take the parts of you that fear dependency and ask them, what are you protecting me from? Write the answers down. Dialogue with them. You'll find that these inner voices aren't enemies, they're survivors, and when they feel heard, they soften. That's when true strength emerges. Not in solitude, but in discernment. Not in isolation, but in choosing who deserves to stand beside you. You don't need everyone, you just need truthful ones. You sense things others don't, and sometimes it scares even you. You walk into a room and immediately feel what no one is saying. The energy is off, the smiles feel rehearsed, the silence between words is louder than the conversation. Other people miss it, but you feel it, deep in your chest, like static electricity beneath your skin, like a whisper that won't shut up. Carl Jung called this the intuitive function, a core way of perceiving the world, not through logic or observation, but through unconscious insight. He wrote that intuition is like a sixth sense, a perception that rises up from within, bringing images, ideas, and warnings that logic alone can't explain. It's not woo, it's not imagination. It's the mind receiving data before language is even formed. And for people like you, this gift is always on. Dr. Elaine Aron, who coined the term highly sensitive person, explained it this way. You notice subtleties that others miss. That doesn't make you dramatic, it makes you attuned. But attunement comes with a cost, because while you're reading the energy of the room, you're also absorbing it. And over time, that turns into fatigue, irritability, emotional overwhelm, even physical pain. Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, In the Body Keeps the Score, showed that emotionally attuned people often carry stress in the body, not just the mind. Why? Because your system is like a sponge, soaking up every unspoken feeling, every unresolved tension, every contradiction others pretend doesn't exist. You're not imagining it. You're just noticing what others have trained themselves to ignore. But here's the danger Jung warned about. If you don't learn to create psychological boundaries, you'll become lost in a sea of other people's unprocessed emotions. You'll become what he called an unconscious therapist, forever tuning into everyone else while forgetting yourself. Let me ask you something. Do you sometimes feel responsible for everyone else's mood? Do you replay conversations in your head, wondering what emotion you picked up and why? That's not anxiety. That's intuitive saturation. You're scanning the emotional landscape constantly. And unless you learn to ground, you'll burn out. Glennon Doyle, in Untamed, wrote, when women learn to trust their own knowing, they begin to choose themselves over the noise. That's what you're being called to do now. Not to shut off your intuition, but to protect it, to become its guardian instead of its victim. Here's how Jung approached this with patience. He encouraged the practice of symbolic separation. Before entering a conversation, pause, take a deep breath. In your mind's eye, imagine a circle of light around you, a container. Say to yourself, I can feel what's mine, I can release what's not. It sounds simple, but for people like you, it's essential, because otherwise, you'll confuse perceiving pain with owning it. And here's the light side of this gift. When properly held, your intuition becomes more than a reaction. It becomes a compass. You're able to navigate people's motives. You sense opportunities before they're obvious. You avoid betrayals others walk into blindly. You discern authenticity from manipulation in seconds. You are wired for deep perception. You just need the internal boundaries to match your sensitivity. So next time someone tells you you're just overthinking, just smile. Because what they call over is your inner genius at work. You crave meaning more than acceptance, and it makes you incompatible with most of modern life. You've probably tried to care about the things everyone else seems to care about. The job title, the nice house, the image, the applause. And for a while, maybe you convinced yourself you could do it. Maybe you even got good at the performance. But then it hit. That silent, gnawing emptiness. The voice inside that whispered, this can't be it. Carl Jung understood this feeling better than anyone. He believed that when a person lives in opposition to their own psychological type, when they betray their inner truth for outer approval, the psyche begins to revolt. And that revolt shows up as neurosis, depression, anxiety, disconnection, restlessness you can't explain. Viktor Frankl, in Man's Search for Meaning, wrote when a person can't find a deep sense of meaning, they distract themselves with pleasure. And most people do exactly that. They scroll, they shop, they chase eyes, because they're terrified to sit still and ask the real questions. Why am I here? What matters to me truly? What would I die for? Or live fully for? But you can't not ask those questions. You can't play the game. You see through the script, and no matter how hard you try to suppress it, your soul refuses to settle. And that's why you've often felt like a misfit. You're not built for shallow conversations. You're not excited by artificial milestones. You can't bond over drama, gossip, or dopamine, because you don't want a life that looks good. You want one that feels right. Mark Manson put it bluntly. Happiness is not about feeling good all the time. It's about caring about things that truly matter. But here's the painful part. Choosing meaning over acceptance almost always means choosing solitude. At least for a while, you may have lost friends, disappointed family, walked away from careers, relationships, or communities that no longer reflected who you are becoming. And in those quiet moments, it's easy to question yourself, easy to wonder, am I making a mistake? Should I just go back and play the role? Jung would say, that doubt is part of the process. The ego dies slowly, and every time you choose truth over fitting in, you undergo a mini-death, a release of who you thought you were supposed to be. But here's the deeper truth. Your refusal to settle isn't rebellion, it's alignment. Your discomfort is a compass, pointing to the places you've outgrown. And when you choose meaning over conformity, you don't just transform yourself, you ripple outward. Jung believed that individuals who follow the call of meaning become catalysts for the collective unconscious. They challenge the system simply by refusing to obey it blindly. They remind others, not with their words, but their lives, that something deeper is possible. But this path requires stamina, because society won't clap for your truth until they need it. Here's what Steven Pressfield wrote in The War of Art. Resistance will tell you anything to keep you from doing your work. It will perjure, fabricate. It will seduce you. It is insidious. It will assume any form if that's what it takes to stop you. It will reason with you like a lawyer. It will promise you a life of comfort. It will tell you that you're too tired, too broke, too busy, too stressed. Resistance is always lying and always full of shit. And that's what you're fighting. Resistance. Not just from the world, but from inside yourself. So how do you stay anchored? Here's Jung's advice. Create sacred rituals that tie your inner life to your outer one. It could be journaling with no filter, morning walks in silence, asking yourself, before every major decision, is this aligned with who I am or who I'm trying to impress? When you live this way, something shifts. You stop chasing purpose and you start living it. You vet outgrown people and places that once felt like home, and it hurts more than you expected. There's a quiet kind of grief no one talks about. The grief of becoming someone your old life no longer recognizes. At first, it's subtle. You stop laughing at the same jokes. You pull back from conversations that used to excite you. You feel disconnected in rooms where you once felt seen. And then, it deepens. You start questioning everything. The roles you played, the values you inherited, the identity you constructed to keep the peace. And piece by piece, it all begins to fall away. Carl Jung called this the process of psychological death and rebirth. The shedding of the false self, the persona, to reveal the authentic self buried beneath conditioning. It sounds poetic, but in real life it's brutal. You start losing people. Not because you've become cruel, but because you've stopped performing. The friends who knew you as the fun one, the fixer, the yes person. They don't know what to do with your new boundaries. They miss the version of you that made them comfortable. And that's the part no one tells you. Growth can feel like betrayal, even when it's not. Dr. Nicola Pera explains it clearly in How to Do the Work. Healing often means becoming a completely different version of yourself, one that your past may no longer recognize, and your future has not yet met. You're not just evolving, you're disrupting a system, one built on who you used to be. But here's the thing, you're not walking away from them. You're walking toward yourself. Jay Shetty, in Think Like a Monk, says, you don't break away from others to be alone. You break away to come back whole. And yet, this transition has a name. Jung called it the dark night of the soul. It's the period where your old life dies, but the new one hasn't fully emerged. It's not depression. It's not failure. It's existential displacement. The disorientation of being reborn without a script. You may find yourself saying, I don't know who I am anymore. Why does everything feel hollow? Why can't I connect with anyone like I used to? Because you're not the same person. And that's not a crisis, it's a threshold. Brianna Wiest in The Mountain Is You writes, your new life is going to cost you your old one. It's going to cost you your comfort zone, your sense of direction, your relationships, and your normal, but it will give you something better, real. And once you step into real, you can't return to the performance. That's the irreversible nature of awakening. But here's what Jung also discovered. When you stop shrinking, you begin to resonate at a different frequency, one that attracts people who don't want your mask. They want your truth. This is what Jung called psychological resonance, the deep, magnetic pull between people who have done the work to become themselves. When you live authentically, you send out a signal, and others walking the same path find you, not because you've sought them, but because your energy no longer speaks the language of conformity. So yes, the middle is messy. Yes, you'll lose some things you once loved, but what's waiting for you on the other side is alignment. And people who see you without asking you to dim. Here's a practice Jung would approve of. Write down the roles you've outgrown. Ask yourself, who did I become to survive? And who am I becoming to live? This is how you move through the grief, by honoring both versions of yourself without clinging to either. You're not lost. You're between versions. And soon, the next one will begin to speak. You offer a rare kind of presence, and it's both your power and your burden. People open up to you. Strangers tell you their life stories within minutes. You've probably been told, I don't know why I'm telling you this, but deep down, you do know. You carry something most people can't name, a stillness, a safety, a non-judgmental presence that lets others breathe, cry, or finally say the thing they've been hiding for years. Carl Jung called this the ability to create psychological holding space. It's not a technique. It has a quality of being a soul-level trait that allows people to feel deeply seen without ever being explained. You don't just hear words, you hear what wasn't said. You don't just witness pain, you mirror it back with compassion. Brown says, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection. And that's what you offer. Not solutions, not advice, but real connection in a world drowning in distraction. But here's the dark side of that light. While you're holding space for others, no one is holding space for you, because you've become so good at being the strong one, so skilled at soothing the chaos, that people forget you need to. Alice Miller, in The Drama of the Gifted Child, wrote those who are forced to grow up too early often become excellent caregivers but forget how to care for themselves. And that's the trap. Your empathy becomes a performance. Your availability becomes a prison. You start to vanish behind your own compassion. You become the therapist, the fixer, the emotional anchor, and slowly, the weight becomes unbearable. Let me ask you something, and be honest. Have you ever cried alone so no one would have to hold you for once? Have you ever comforted someone while feeling like you were crumbling inside? That's not just emotional fatigue. That's compassion fatigue, a form of depletion Jung warned about when the inner world is neglected in favor of serving others. And yet, you feel guilty for setting boundaries. You tell yourself, they need me. But the truth is, you need you. Nedra Glover, Tawab, in Set Boundaries, Find Peace, says, people who respect your boundaries are the ones you want to keep close. The rest will teach you who they truly are. So here's the shift. Your presence is powerful, but it's not free. You have to decide who deserves access to it, who replenishes you, who truly sees you, not just what you offer. Jung believed that every healer must undergo a reversal, a moment where they stop identifying with the helper role and begin to embrace their own needs, longings, and desires. He called this the integration of the shadow caregiver, the part of you that sacrifices for love, because deep down, you believe it's the only way to receive it, but that belief, it's not truth, it's programming. Here's a practice Jung might prescribe. After every emotional interaction, ask yourself, did I just give more than I had to give? Was I present because I wanted to be, or because I felt I had to be? Then sit in stillness, breathe, and remind yourself, I am not just a container for others. I am a soul with needs of my own. When you reclaim your boundaries, your presence doesn't disappear. It becomes more precise, more powerful, more honest. And that's when the right people stop treating your empathy as a resource and start honoring it as a gift. Now let's explore the final sign. That haunting, beautiful feeling that you're here for something more. Even if you don't yet know what it is, you feel called to something more. Even if you can't yet name it, it's not ambition. It's not ego. It's not about titles, followers, or wealth. It's something quieter, something older, a whisper that keeps coming back every time life gets still enough to hear, a feeling that says, you were made for something deeper. You felt it since you were young, even if you buried it beneath responsibility. Even if you hid it beneath, even if no one around you ever validated it, you still knew. Carl Jung called this the awakening of the transcendent function, the soul's internal pressure to evolve beyond what the world has told you to want. You may not know what your purpose is, but you know what it's not. It's not comfort, it's not conformity. It's not living the same day, over and over, until your last breath. Simon Sinek, in Start With Why, said, working hard for something we don't care about is called stress. Working hard for something we love is called passion, and that's the tension you live in. You've probably worked jobs, built routines, followed the rules, but still felt like something vital was missing, like a song stuck in your chest with no melody to match. But here's what Jung discovered. That ache is not a flaw. It's evidence, a psychic signal that your life must become a bridge between who you are now and who you were always meant to be. And this kind of calling, it's not always grand. It doesn't have to look like world-changing activism or building empires. Sometimes, it's a simple truth. I can't keep living disconnected from myself. James Clear, in Atomic Habits, reminds us, and when you start voting for purpose over approval, authenticity over autopilot, meaning over maintenance, that's when the shift begins. But Jung also gave a warning. With purpose comes inflation, the risk of believing you're above others just because your vision feels big. He wrote that when a person identifies too much with their calling, they lose the humility required to carry it. So here's the balance. You are special, but not superior. You are called, but not exempt from the work, the humility, the sacrifice. Your purpose is not a performance. It's a responsibility. Michael Singer, in The Untethered Soul, said, you re not the voice in your head. You re the one who notices it. And when you begin noticing your desire to serve something higher, without needing to be worshipped for it. That's when you become truly free. Let me ask you something. Have you ever felt that time is running out? That there's something in you, a message, a movement, a creation that's waiting to come through, but you keep delaying? That urgency isn't fear, it's readiness. Jung called it the individuation impulse, the soul's final push toward integration, toward becoming the full version of yourself before the clock runs out. Here's a practice to begin listening. Every day, ask yourself, what would I do today if I trusted my life had a purpose, even if I can't yet explain it? Write down what comes up, then act on it, even in the smallest way, because purpose doesn't arrive all at once. It's not delivered like a package. It's uncovered, little by little, through alignment. And one day, without even realizing it, you'll look around and realize you didn't find your purpose. You became it. Now, take a deep breath, because if even half of these signs resonated with you, you're not just different, you're rare. You are what Carl Jung called a differentiated individual. Someone who has stepped beyond the unconscious mass mind into the hard, beautiful work of becoming fully awake. In a world that fears emotion, you feel. In a world that worships obedience, you question. In a world that rewards silence, you speak. And that means you are not the problem. You are the edge where evolution happens. So now, let's close this journey with a final word and a call to step fully into who you are. So, what if you're not too much? What if the world is just too shallow for the kind of depth you carry? Carl Jung believed that individuals like you, rare, emotionally attuned, intuitively gifted, are not here to fit in. You're not broken, you're not dramatic, you're not too sensitive, too curious, too intense. You're awake in a world that you see in a world that pretends, you feel in a world that avoids, and that makes you part of what Jung called the leading edge of human consciousness. Yes, it's lonely sometimes. Yes, it's misunderstood. Yes, it requires more courage than most people will ever need. But this is the work to hold space, to ask better questions, to feel more deeply, to outgrow what no longer fits, to crave meaning over approval, and to walk, even when no one else around you understands the road you're on. And in doing so, you give others permission to do the same. So I'll leave you with this. Drop a comment below. Tell me which of these signs felt the most true to you. Share this with someone who has been told they read too much, when really, they're just ahead. And don't forget to subscribe, because this is just the beginning. We're going deeper. Together, remember. You're not here to dim your light, to comfort the dark. You're here to become who you truly are. So others remember they can too.